There comes a moment in life when the empath, the one who feels deeply, who absorbs the energies of the world around them, who carries the burdens of others with grace, decides to walk away. This is not a sudden act of anger, nor a reaction of pride. It is a conscious choice born from clarity, self-respect, and awareness. The empath has given all they could give. They have nurtured, healed, and extended compassion endlessly. And yet, they recognize that there are those who do not respond to love with respect, kindness with reciprocity, and care with integrity. In that moment, the empath understands. Their presence is a gift, and their absence is a mirror. The narcissist, the one who thrives on control, admiration, and manipulation, depends entirely on the empath. They feed on the energy, the understanding, and the emotional labor that the empath provides. They take without giving, demand without reciprocity, and consume without acknowledgement. And yet, they rarely see the empath as an autonomous being with boundaries, awareness, and self-worth. The narcissist assumes the empath will always remain, that their presence is guaranteed, that their care is infinite. But life, in its quiet wisdom, teaches that even the most giving heart has limits, and when those limits are honored, the dynamic shifts irrevocably. When the empath walks away, the narcissist breaks, not in a dramatic explosion, but in subtle unraveling. They may attempt manipulation, guilt, or coercion. They may protest, rage, or attempt to reclaim control. Yet the foundation of their power, the source of their energy, has been removed. The empath's departure is not just physical, it is energetic, emotional, and spiritual. The narcissist relies on the empath's engagement to maintain the illusion of dominance. Without it, their identity begins to crumble. Their confidence, which was always fragile, begins to fracture. Their narrative of superiority begins to lose coherence. The act of walking away is not passive. It is deliberate, measured, and purposeful. The empath does not leave out of vengeance. They leave out of clarity. They understand the imbalance, the pattern, and the consequences of continued engagement. They recognize that remaining in a dynamic that drains their energy, undermines their self-worth, and diminishes their spirit is not love. It is self-sacrifice at the cost of self-preservation. And so, walking away becomes an act of ultimate empowerment, a reclaiming of self, and a statement that energy, attention, and love are not commodities to be exploited. This departure reveals the fragile nature of narcissistic power. The narcissist appears confident, dominant, and in control when the empath is present. Their energy seems limitless, their narratives convincing, their influence undeniable. Yet this power is not inherent, it is borrowed. It is sustained by the attention, validation, and emotional labor of those who are empathetic, aware, and generous. Remove that source and the power collapses. The narcissist is left confronting the reality of their own emptiness, insecurity, and dependence. Their facade of strength, maintained through manipulation, begins to crack under the absence of energy they once took for granted. The empath's walk is an act of profound self-mastery. It is rooted in self-awareness, discernment, and inner strength. They have learned to observe without attachment, to feel without surrendering, and to give without losing themselves. They recognize the cycles of control, the tactics of manipulation, and the illusions of superiority. And when the heart finally realizes that further engagement would only perpetuate imbalance, it chooses withdrawal over confrontation. The departure itself becomes a form of teaching, a demonstration of boundaries, self-respect, and the power of presence. When the empath leaves, the narcissist experiences a void. They may initially respond with anger, disbelief, or attempts to regain control. But this is only the surface of the unraveling. Beneath it lies an existential confrontation with dependency, inadequacy, and delusion. The narcissist has constructed an identity based on the responses of others, a facade sustained by admiration, fear, and emotional fuel. When the empath, who has provided both emotional sustenance and moral reflection, withdraws, the narcissist encounters the truth they have long avoided. Their power was never intrinsic. It was borrowed temporary, and conditional. The empath's departure is also a mirror for the narcissist. It reflects the patterns they have maintained, the boundaries they have crossed, and the harm they have caused. But narcissists rarely see this mirror as a tool for growth. Instead, they may attempt to repair the imbalance superficially, through persuasion, deception, or renewed attempts at control. Yet the true lesson of the empath's departure cannot be bypassed. Energy, attention, and love cannot be coerced, demanded, or manipulated. They must be given freely. And once withdrawn, the narcissist must confront the consequences of their actions. There is a sacredness to the empath's withdrawal. It is a declaration that love cannot be weaponized, that care cannot be exploited, and that the self cannot be surrendered endlessly. In the quiet strength of their absence, the empath demonstrates a principle that is often invisible in life. Power is not always about domination. It is about alignment, presence, and integrity. By walking away, the empath restores balance, preserves their own energy, and affirms the law that what is taken without consent cannot sustain connection. The breaking of the narcissist is not necessarily immediate or dramatic. It may unfold slowly, subtly, and even invisibly. They may feel confusion, resentment, or longing. They may question their identity, their tactics, and their assumptions. Without the empath's energy, their patterns of manipulation and control are exposed as fragile, ineffective, and unsustainable. The narcissist is forced to confront a reality they have long denied, that their influence depends on the consent and engagement of others, and when that engagement is withdrawn, the foundation of their power collapses. This is why the empath's act is profound. It is not revenge. It is not anger. It is not a strategy. It is a demonstration of natural law. Energy flows where it is honored and withheld where it is not. The empath teaches through withdrawal what cannot be taught through words alone. Respect must be mutual, care must be reciprocal, and presence must be conscious. When the narcissist experiences the absence of what they took for granted, they are confronted with the consequences of imbalance, the fracture of their facade, the emptiness behind their dominance, and the reality that connection cannot be sustained through manipulation alone. Walking away is also an act of liberation. For the empath, it is freedom from emotional depletion, from cycles of manipulation, and from the burden of maintaining balance where it is not reciprocated. It is an awakening to their own power, their own boundaries, and their own capacity for self-care. The act of departure is a reclaiming of energy, a restoration of dignity, and a reaffirmation of the principle that love cannot exist without respect. And so, the empath leaves, quietly, deliberately, and with inner strength. They do not seek confrontation or revenge. They do not linger in resentment or anger. They simply recognize the imbalance, honor their own limits, and step away. And in this act, the narcissist experiences a fracture, not always visible, not always immediate, but profound in its effect. The absence of energy, validation, and attention destabilizes the foundation of control, exposing the dependency, fragility, and illusion that have long been hidden. The empath's departure is also a lesson for the world around them. It demonstrates the principle that energy is precious, that boundaries are sacred, and that self-respect is a form of power. Those who witness the act, even indirectly, see the consequences of imbalance and exploitation. They observe that manipulation cannot sustain connection, that control cannot substitute for respect, and that the withdrawal of presence carries weight beyond physical absence. Ultimately, the empath walks away because they honor themselves. They understand that their worth is not defined by the validation of others, that their love is not a commodity, and that their presence is not a guarantee. They embody the principle that self-respect is the foundation of any meaningful relationship, and that energy, care, and attention must be preserved, protected, and offered wisely. When the empath leaves, the narcissist breaks, not because of anger or confrontation, but because the source of their borrowed power has been removed. The absence of attention, validation, and emotional labor exposes the fragility of the ego built on dependency, The narcissist is forced to confront their illusions, their patterns, and their reliance on others for self-definition. And in this breaking, the empath demonstrates a truth far deeper than words, that power, when unearned and exploitative, cannot endure, and that love, when freely given yet withdrawn wisely, is the ultimate teacher. The empath's departure is a statement. Boundaries are sacred, energy is precious, and self-respect is non-negotiable. It is an act of clarity, presence, and inner power, and the narcissist, faced with absence, is left with a choice to reflect, to evolve, or to remain trapped in the illusions of borrowed power. The act of walking away is therefore both liberation and teaching. It restores balance, affirms self-worth, and demonstrates that manipulation cannot withstand integrity. It is a quiet yet profound reminder that the dynamics of power and energy are governed by consciousness, awareness, and self-honor. And in the stillness of absence, the empath reveals the truth. When you honor yourself fully, the world and those who depend on you for false sustenance will inevitably confront the consequences, because when the empath walks away, the narcissist breaks, not violently, but inevitably, and in that breaking lies the silent, powerful truth. Integrity, self-respect, and conscious presence are forces stronger than manipulation, more enduring than control, and unshakable in their quiet wisdom. The empath walks away not because they are weak, not because they are angry, not because they are fearful, but because they have reached a place of clarity, awareness, and understanding. They have observed the dynamics of giving and taking, of energy exchanged and energy drained, and they have realized that remaining in the presence of someone who thrives on manipulation and control no longer serves them. The empath understands that their power is their presence, and that by remaining in a situation that diminishes them, they sacrifice not only their energy but their soul. Walking away becomes an act of courage, a reclaiming of self, and a silent declaration that energy, love, and attention are not infinite resources to be exploited. The narcissist, on the other hand, relies entirely on the empath for sustenance. They have built their world on borrowed energy, on validation given freely but without reciprocity. Their identity, their sense of superiority, and their confidence depend on the engagement of those who can feel deeply, who can empathize, who can tolerate and absorb the imbalance they create. Remove that energy, and the narcissist is confronted with their own emptiness. They are faced with the reality that their power was never inherent, but borrowed. And the moment the empath withdraws, the illusion begins to crumble. It is important to understand that the breaking of the narcissist is rarely immediate. It may not manifest as anger or visible collapse. Often, it is subtle, insidious, a slow unraveling that begins in the mind, in the psyche, in the fragile ego that has been sustained by external validation. They may experience confusion, disbelief, frustration, or desperation. They may attempt to reclaim what has been withdrawn, using charm, manipulation, or coercion. But the empath's absence is not a gap to be filled, it is a boundary to be honored. The narcissist is confronted with the truth. Their control depends entirely on the presence of those they exploit. The act of walking away is not a retreat, it is a declaration of power. The empath does not need to fight to assert their boundaries. They do not need to argue, justify, or manipulate. They simply step away. In this stillness, in this act of absence, they teach the narcissist a lesson far more profound than confrontation could ever achieve. Without the empath's energy, the house of mirrors they built begins to collapse. Their narratives of control, superiority, and invincibility can no longer stand. Their sense of importance, maintained through emotional theft, begins to fracture. The empath's decision is rooted in self-awareness. They have learned to observe without attachment, to give without losing themselves, and to feel without being consumed. They recognize the patterns of manipulation, the cycles of control, and the ways in which the narcissist attempts to exploit empathy as a weapon. In choosing to walk away, the empath honors themselves and reclaims their energy. They understand that love without boundaries becomes a tool for exploitation, and that compassion without reciprocity becomes suffering. This departure also serves as a mirror to the narcissist. It reflects the imbalance, the dishonesty, and the unsustainable nature of their patterns. For years, they may have believed their power to be intrinsic, their influence absolute, and their identity self-sufficient. But the absence of the empath exposes the truth. Their energy, their dominance, and their sense of self are all contingent. And in this moment of exposure, their fragility becomes visible, even if they attempt to hide it beneath bravado, anger, or manipulation. The breaking of the narcissist is not just a consequence, it is a natural law. Energy follows consciousness. Attention fuels power. When the empath, who has been the source of validation, emotional labor, and subtle support, withdraws, the narcissist cannot maintain the illusion any longer. They are forced to face themselves in a way that is uncomfortable, unavoidable, and transformative, if only they choose to reflect. Without the empath's presence, the narcissist experiences emptiness, uncertainty, and a destabilization of identity. Their control is gone, their narratives unravel, and the foundation of borrowed power collapses. Walking away is a sacred act for the empath. It is a demonstration of self-respect, discernment, and conscious living. They are not motivated by revenge, spite, or anger. Their action arises from a deep understanding that energy is sacred and that boundaries are necessary for survival, growth, and inner peace. By removing themselves from the toxic dynamic, the empath restores balance, reclaims their vitality, and affirms the principle that love and attention cannot be coerced, manipulated, or demanded. The narcissist's breaking also serves a teaching function. In the absence of the empath's energy, they are confronted with the consequences of exploitation. They may not understand it fully at first, but the void left by withdrawal forces reflection. It reveals the unsustainability of manipulation, the dependency created on external validation, and the fragility of power built on control rather than integrity. For those who are willing to observe, learn, and grow, this breaking can become an opportunity for self-awareness and transformation. But this requires humility, insight, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. It is also important to understand the emotional and energetic mechanics of this dynamic. The narcissist depends on the empath not just for attention, but for the regulation of their own instability. The empath absorbs emotional fluctuations, validates narratives, and provides reassurance that maintains the narcissist's sense of identity. Without this input, the narcissist is left with themselves, unshielded from the consequences of their own insecurities, ego, and unmet needs. This is the essence of the breaking. It is an exposure to self, a confrontation with emptiness, and an inevitable destabilization of identity. The empath's power is subtle, profound, and transformative. It is not in confrontation or aggression. It is in presence, awareness, and the willingness to honor boundaries. By choosing to leave, the empath demonstrates the natural law of energy. It cannot be taken by force. It cannot be demanded, and it cannot be sustained without consent. Their departure is a form of teaching, a restoration of balance, and a reclamation of their own integrity. The breaking of the narcissist can manifest in many ways: confusion, anger, attempts at manipulation, despair, or even denial. But no matter the form, the underlying truth is the same. Their power depended on the empath's engagement. Without it, the illusion collapses. Their sense of invincibility dissipates. Their narratives of control and superiority are revealed as fragile constructs. And this is the quiet, powerful, and transformative truth. The empath does not need to fight, argue, or manipulate. Their absence is enough to restore balance, teach lessons, and reveal truth. The empath's decision to walk away is not only an act of self-preservation, but an act of liberation. For themselves and for the narcissist, for the empath, it frees them from cycles of depletion, manipulation, and emotional burden. For the narcissist, it presents an unavoidable mirror, a chance, if they choose, to confront their patterns, evolve, and reclaim integrity. The act of departure restores the natural order. Energy flows where it is honored. Attention returns where it is valued. and relationships exist in reciprocity rather than exploitation. Ultimately, the empath walks away because they understand the value of their own energy, the necessity of boundaries, and the sacredness of self-respect. The narcissist breaks not because of confrontation or anger, but because their borrowed power has been removed. Their sense of control, identity, and influence, sustained for so long through manipulation and emotional theft, cannot survive in the absence of the empath. And in this breaking, a profound truth is revealed. The power of presence, integrity, and self-respect far surpasses the illusions of manipulation, control, and domination. The empath teaches through absence what words cannot convey, that energy is sacred, that boundaries are inviolable, and that love without respect cannot sustain connection. Their departure is a meditation on integrity, awareness, and conscious living, and the narcissist, confronted with this absence, experiences a breaking that is inevitable, transformative, and irreversible, a confrontation with the reality that power built on exploitation cannot endure. There is a profound energy in the empath, a presence that feels, senses, and understands not only their own inner landscape, but the emotional currents of the world around them. This sensitivity is a gift, a tool, and often a source of vulnerability. For those who understand and honor its power, it brings insight, compassion, and wisdom. But for those who seek to dominate, control, and manipulate, it becomes a resource to be exploited, a lever to maintain influence, and a source of borrowed strength. The narcissist relies upon the empath, consciously or unconsciously, to validate their importance, to regulate their emotions, and to supply energy that they cannot generate internally. This dynamic is subtle, often invisible to outsiders, yet it shapes the deepest patterns of connection, control, and emotional survival. The empath's decision to walk away is rarely impulsive. It arises from cycles of observation, reflection, and self-realization. They notice patterns, the unreciprocated care, the manipulation masked as charm, the emotional volatility that requires constant repair. They notice the drain on their energy, the depletion of their emotional reserves, and the invisible weight of carrying responsibility for someone else's stability. This is not resentment, it is clarity. The empath understands that while they can give endlessly, their energy is sacred, finite, and must be preserved for relationships, actions, and pursuits that honor both self and other. When the empath walks away, the narcissist experiences a disruption unlike any confrontation can produce. It is not violent, not loud, not immediate in many cases, but it is profound in its effect. The narcissist's power is borrowed, dependent upon the presence, attention, and emotional labor of the empath. Without this, the narcissist is left facing their own internal instability. They confront a reality that has been hidden behind manipulation, charm, and control. The energy that sustained their dominance, influence, and self-assurance is gone. The sense of superiority begins to fracture. Their identity begins to tremble, and the carefully constructed illusion of control begins to collapse. The empath's act of departure is a quiet force. It does not seek to punish, shame, or retaliate. It is not driven by ego or anger. Instead, it is a deliberate restoration of balance, an assertion of boundaries, and a reclaiming of personal energy. In the stillness of absence, the empath teaches what words cannot convey. Respect must be earned, attention cannot be coerced, and love that is not reciprocated is not sustainable. The departure itself becomes a mirror, reflecting the narcissist's reliance on others, exposing their fragility and revealing the emptiness that lies beneath their grandiose facades. The breaking of the narcissist is multidimensional. On the surface, they may appear angry, confused, or frustrated. They may attempt to regain control through manipulation, charm, or coercion. They may question, pressure, or even rage at the absence of the empath. But beneath these surface reactions lies a more profound unraveling. They are confronted with the truth of their dependence, the energy that sustained them, the admiration that upheld them, and the stability they assumed was inherent are in fact borrowed, Their identity, previously masked by dominance and control, begins to falter under the weight of this absence. This moment is both delicate and transformative. The empath's withdrawal forces the narcissist to face themselves in ways they have long avoided. They confront their insecurities, their fear of abandonment, and the hollow core beneath the ego. For many, this is a moment of denial, a frantic attempt to reclaim what has been withdrawn. For some, it is a moment of introspection, an opportunity to recognize the consequences of exploitation, manipulation, and emotional theft. And for those rare few who are willing to confront their patterns honestly, this absence becomes a catalyst for profound self-awareness. The empath's choice to leave is an act of mastery, though mastery is not measured by control, domination, or visible force. It is measured by clarity, alignment, and the conscious exercise of boundaries. The empath has observed, reflected, and understood. They recognize the cycles of depletion, the subtle manipulations, and the illusions that have maintained the narcissist's sense of power. And when they step away, they do so not to punish, but to honor themselves. Their departure is a restoration of equilibrium, a return of energy to its rightful flow, and a statement of the principle that emotional labor and attention cannot be taken for granted. This breaking, subtle yet undeniable, is often experienced internally by the narcissist before it manifests externally. They may feel emptiness, confusion, and vulnerability. Their ego, accustomed to external validation and constant supply, begins to encounter its own limitations. The absence of the empath reveals the fragility of a power built on others' energy. The narcissist is forced to acknowledge what they have long ignored, that connection, respect, and emotional energy are not commodities to be taken, but forces that must be nurtured mutually and consciously. The empath's departure is also a lesson in self-preservation and liberation. It restores their sense of integrity, conserves their energy, and protects the sanctity of their being. By walking away, they demonstrate that their presence is valuable, their energy is sacred, and their emotional labor cannot be exploited indefinitely. They affirm the principle that love, compassion, and care are not obligations to those who fail to honor them, but gifts to be given wisely, consciously, and reciprocally. Furthermore, this act is a demonstration of natural law. Energy flows where it is honored and withheld where it is not. The narcissist's breakdown is not a punishment imposed by the empath, but a natural consequence of disrupted dynamics. The absence of attention and emotional supply exposes the structural weaknesses in the narcissist's identity. Their illusions of control, superiority, and self-sufficiency cannot endure in the absence of borrowed energy. In this quiet yet profound breaking, the empath demonstrates the immutable principle that energy and respect cannot be taken without consequence. The emotional resonance of walking away is powerful. The empath's absence communicates more than words ever could. It is a declaration of boundaries, self-respect, and conscious living. It communicates that energy is precious, that manipulation cannot sustain relationships, and that the sanctity of the self is paramount. The narcissist, confronted with this absence, experiences the inevitability of consequence. They may attempt to manipulate, to charm, to coerce. But without the empath's engagement, these efforts cannot restore the borrowed power that has been withdrawn. In this way, the empath teaches through stillness and absence. They show the narcissist and the world that control is temporary, influence is conditional, and power built on exploitation cannot endure. Their departure is both liberation and revelation. It frees them from cycles of emotional depletion and manipulation, while simultaneously reflecting back to the narcissist the truth of their dependence and fragility. Ultimately, the empath walks away because they honor themselves, their energy, and their integrity. They recognize that their value is not defined by the approval or attention of another, and that their presence should be reserved for those who respect, honor, and reciprocate. The narcissist breaks not because of confrontation or force, but because their borrowed power, sustained for so long through manipulation and emotional exploitation, has been removed. Their fragility is revealed, their dependency exposed, and their illusions dismantled. This dynamic, repeated across relationships and interactions, carries a profound truth. Power is not in domination, control, or coercion. True strength lies in awareness, presence, and the courage to honor boundaries. The empath demonstrates this through action, the deliberate, conscious, and transformative act of walking away. And in this absence, the narcissist is faced with a breaking that is inevitable, profound, and inescapable. The departure is not revenge, it is mastery. It is a quiet, meditative reclaiming of energy, dignity, and power. It is an affirmation that manipulation cannot endure, that control is conditional, and that the natural order of energy, respect, and reciprocity cannot be violated without consequence. The empath's choice is a lesson in conscious living. Love and attention are gifts, and the integrity of one's own energy is sacred. And so, the empath walks away, quietly, steadily, and with inner strength. And the narcissist, deprived of what they depended on, breaks, gradually, subtly, but inevitably. This breaking is the ultimate revelation. Borrowed power cannot sustain the illusion of control. Energy, presence, and self-respect are forces beyond manipulation. Boundaries, once honored, cannot be ignored. And the empath, in their departure, restores balance, teaches truth, and affirms the ultimate law. What is taken without consent cannot endure. The empath is a being of profound depth and sensitivity, one who feels the currents of life not only within themselves, but in the world around them. They sense the subtleties of emotion, absorb the unspoken pains and joys of others, and navigate relationships with a kind of quiet awareness that often goes unnoticed. But within this capacity lies both a gift and a vulnerability. The empath's energy, while generous and healing, can be exploited, misunderstood, and drained by those who seek to manipulate rather than connect, to control rather than honor, and to take rather than give. The narcissist, in this dynamic, depends upon the empath for sustenance, not the sustenance of shared understanding, but the energy of emotional labor, validation, and attention that maintains the narcissist's fragile ego. The empath's choice to walk away is neither impulsive nor reactive. It is born of clarity, self-awareness, and the recognition of imbalance. They have given endlessly, absorbed tirelessly, and tolerated patterns of exploitation long enough to understand that continued engagement diminishes their own vitality. This decision is not an act of vengeance or anger. It is an act of preservation, an assertion of boundaries, and a demonstration of inner strength. By walking away, the empath restores equilibrium, both within themselves and in the energy dynamics that have long been skewed. The narcissist experiences this departure as a rupture in the fabric of their carefully constructed reality. Their power, which appears absolute when the empath is present, is revealed to be borrowed, dependent, and conditional. The absence of attention, emotional supply, and validation exposes the fragility of the identity they have built. For years, they may have maintained an illusion of control, dominance, and superiority. But the moment the empath withdraws, the illusion begins to falter. Confusion, frustration, and subtle unraveling ensue. The narcissist is forced to confront a truth that had been hidden behind manipulation. Without the empath, their power cannot sustain itself. Walking away is an act of sacred power for the empath. It is the quiet declaration that their energy is their own, that their love is not an obligation, and that their boundaries cannot be violated without consequence. The act is transformative, not only for themselves, but for the narcissist who is confronted with the absence of what they relied upon. The empath demonstrates that true strength is not in force, argument, or control, but in presence, awareness, and the conscious exercise of boundaries. Their departure is a teaching, a reflection of natural law. Energy follows consciousness, attention fuels influence, and what is not honored cannot endure. The breaking of the narcissist unfolds gradually, often invisible to outside observers, On the surface, they may appear to continue as before, projecting confidence and control. Yet internally, the absence of the empath's energy destabilizes the foundation of their identity. Their ego, long propped up by borrowed validation, begins to tremble. They encounter the insecurities, fears, and inadequacies that they had successfully hidden behind charm, manipulation, and control. The departure of the empath is not violent, but it is profound. A quiet, inexorable unraveling of the structures that once seemed unbreakable. The empath's action is rooted in self-mastery. They have observed patterns of manipulation, cycles of emotional drain, and dynamics of dependency. They recognize that remaining in a relationship with a narcissist perpetuates imbalance, diminishes vitality, and inhibits growth. By walking away, they reclaim their energy, preserve their dignity, and affirm the principle that love, attention, and care are not commodities to be taken for granted. This act of withdrawal is both liberation and instruction. It restores the natural flow of energy, teaches boundaries, and exposes the unsustainable nature of exploitation. The narcissist may respond in various ways: attempts to charm, manipulate, guilt, or coerce. They may plead, protest, or rage. But these reactions, however intense, cannot replace the empath's presence, energy, or consent. The narcissist breaking is not a result of punishment imposed externally. It is the natural consequence of disrupted energy dynamics. Their influence, maintained for so long by the empath's engagement, is no longer sustainable. In the quiet absence of the empath, they confront the limitations of their borrowed power and the fragility of identity built upon manipulation and control. The empath's departure is also an exercise in wisdom. They understand that presence is power, attention is energy, and love without respect is futile. By stepping away, they reclaim their resources, restore balance, and teach the narcissist a lesson that words cannot convey. The empath demonstrates that power is not in domination, control, or coercion. It is in clarity, awareness, and the deliberate exercise of boundaries. Their withdrawal communicates profoundly. Respect must be mutual, energy must be honored, and relationships cannot endure on the foundation of exploitation. This act is liberating for the empath, freeing them from cycles of emotional depletion, manipulation, and subtle control. It allows them to reconnect with their own inner power, restore vitality, and reaffirm their self-worth. Their presence is no longer a tool for the narcissist's ego. It becomes a conscious force that is honored, protected, and preserved. In walking away, the empath embodies a principle that is often overlooked. Self-respect is not selfish, energy is not limitless, and boundaries are not optional. The narcissist, deprived of this energy, faces an unavoidable reckoning. Their sense of control, influence, and superiority, long sustained through the engagement of the empath, begins to fracture. They may feel confusion, anger, or despair. Their narratives of dominance and self-sufficiency are challenged. They encounter the truth that without the empath, their borrowed power evaporates. Their identity, constructed on external validation and manipulation, can no longer maintain coherence. The breaking is inevitable, profound, and transformative, whether they choose to see it or not. This dynamic reveals an essential law of energy. What is given freely and honored sustains. What is taken for granted diminishes, and what is exploited collapses under its own weight. The empath teaches this law not through confrontation, but through presence, reflection, and deliberate withdrawal. They demonstrate that influence and control are conditional, that power borrowed from others is temporary, and that respect and energy cannot be forced. The act of walking away restores balance, honors boundaries, and transforms the dynamics of connection in the most fundamental way. Ultimately, the empath walks away because they honor themselves, their energy, and their integrity. They recognize that their value is inherent, not dependent on the validation of another. They understand that love, attention, and care are sacred forces to be given consciously, reciprocated, and respected. The narcissist breaks not because of punishment or confrontation, but because their borrowed power has been removed. Their reliance on the empath is laid bare, their fragility is exposed, and their illusions of control crumble. The act of departure is both liberation and revelation. It frees the empath from cycles of depletion and manipulation, while presenting the narcissist with a mirror of their patterns, dependencies, and vulnerabilities. It restores natural balance, affirms the sacredness of energy, and communicates an undeniable truth. When boundaries are honored, energy is protected, and presence is conscious, manipulation cannot endure. The narcissist, confronted with absence, experiences a breaking that is inevitable, profound, and transformative. Walking away is mastery, a quiet, deliberate, and powerful assertion of self. It demonstrates that strength lies not in domination, but in awareness, that power is rooted not in coercion, but in presence, and that love cannot flourish where it is exploited. The empath teaches through absence, restores balance, and reclaims their own integrity. And in this withdrawal, the narcissist is faced with a breaking that is as inevitable as it is instructive, a reminder that borrowed power cannot sustain the illusion of control indefinitely. There comes a moment in every empath's journey when the awareness of imbalance crystallizes into decisive action. This is the moment when the empath recognizes that giving endlessly, absorbing constantly, and accommodating endlessly does not cultivate harmony. It cultivates dependence, depletion, and sometimes even pain. For the narcissist, the empath's energy is the source of illusion, the foundation of borrowed power, and the invisible fuel that sustains their dominance. Yet when the empath finally steps away, that source is removed. It is not an act of aggression, not a strike of revenge, not a display of anger. It is a deliberate and conscious assertion of self, boundaries, and energy. And in that absence, the narcissist experiences a breaking unlike any they can anticipate. The empath walks away because they have cultivated awareness. They have observed the patterns of manipulation, the cycles of control, and the ways in which their own energy has been consumed without reciprocity. They have endured, they have reflected, and they have learned. And in their wisdom, they understand a profound truth. Energy, care, and attention are sacred. They are gifts, not obligations. They are resources, not commodities. The empath's decision to withdraw is the ultimate act of honoring this truth, a reclaiming of energy, and a restoration of balance that had long been absent from the dynamic. The narcissist, reliant on the empath for energy, attention, and emotional regulation, experiences this withdrawal as a fracture in reality. For years, they have maintained the illusion of control, superiority, and invincibility, yet all of this has been sustained through the empath's engagement, care, and presence. When the empath steps away, the foundation of this borrowed power collapses. Confusion arises, frustration surfaces, and subtle or even dramatic unraveling begins. This is not a theatrical explosion. It is a quiet, insidious, and profound breaking, a confrontation with the truth of dependency that can no longer be avoided. It is important to understand the mechanism of this breaking. The narcissist's sense of self has been externalized. Their confidence, their identity, their perception of dominance all depended upon external validation and emotional supply. The empath, by walking away, removes that validation, interrupts the supply, and exposes the narcissist's internal fragility. Suddenly, the narratives of superiority, control, and invulnerability collapse. They are forced to confront a reality they have long avoided. Their strength was never intrinsic, their power was never self-generated, and their influence relied entirely on the empath's energy. The act of walking away is not passive, nor is it reactive. It is deliberate, conscious, and measured. The empath does not withdraw in anger, resentment, or vindictiveness. They withdraw in clarity, self-respect, and awareness of the natural law that governs energy. Energy flows where it is honored and withheld where it is exploited. The narcissist's breaking is the inevitable consequence of this natural principle. It is a quiet yet powerful demonstration that manipulation cannot sustain itself when the energy it feeds upon is no longer available. The empath's departure is also a profound act of teaching. Words can convey principles, rules, or morality, but actions reveal truth. By withdrawing, the empath teaches the narcissist a lesson that cannot be ignored. Relationships cannot be sustained through exploitation, control cannot be maintained without consent, and influence is conditional upon respect. The absence of the empath is a mirror, reflecting the unsustainability of manipulation, the fragility of borrowed power, and the consequences of emotional exploitation. It is a lesson in energy, presence, and awareness, delivered silently, yet profoundly. For the empath, this act is liberating. It restores vitality, preserves energy, and protects the sanctity of self. It allows them to reconnect with their own power, to cultivate boundaries, and to engage in relationships that honor reciprocity, respect, and integrity. The empath no longer carries the burden of maintaining another's illusion of strength. They are free to act from presence rather than obligation, from wisdom rather than depletion, and from clarity rather than confusion. Their departure is a reclaiming of self, a restoration of balance, and a demonstration of the sacredness of personal energy. For the narcissist, a breaking is a confrontation with self. They may respond with anger, attempts to manipulate, or desperate pleas for validation. They may feel emptiness, confusion, and disorientation. The absence of the empath destabilizes the very identity they had constructed. For many, this leads to denial, projection, or further attempts at control. Yet beneath these surface reactions lies a profound truth. Their borrowed power, their manipulated influence, and their externalized sense of self can no longer be maintained. The fracturing of the narcissist is as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. It is a consequence of natural law, not punishment. The empath, in walking away, demonstrates mastery without confrontation. They embody clarity, presence, and conscious awareness. Their departure teaches the fundamental principle that energy cannot be forced, attention cannot be demanded, and respect cannot be coerced. The narcissist's breaking is a reflection of imbalance, a confrontation with fragility, and a revelation of dependence. It is a quiet, inexorable unraveling, triggered not by aggression, but by the conscious preservation of boundaries and the deliberate reclamation of energy. This dynamic also carries a universal lesson. Power is not inherent in domination or control. It resides in awareness, presence, and integrity. Influence cannot endure when it is built on exploitation. Love, attention, and care cannot flourish when they are extracted rather than freely offered. The empath, by walking away, restores the natural flow of energy, demonstrating that respect, reciprocity, and integrity are the foundations of meaningful connection. The narcissist, faced with absence, is forced to confront the consequences of neglecting these principles. The breaking of the narcissist is inevitable, profound, and transformative, whether they recognize it or not. The illusions that sustain their identity, the narratives that maintain their sense of superiority, and the borrowed energy that fueled their influence all crumble in the empath's absence. Their dependency becomes visible, their fragility undeniable, and their constructed reality disrupted. This is the power of the empath's withdrawal. It transforms the dynamics of energy, exposes truth, and restores balance through the simple act of conscious absence. Ultimately, the empath walks away to honor themselves, their energy, and their integrity. They do so to reclaim vitality, restore balance, and protect the sanctity of their own presence. The narcissist breaks, not because of confrontation, anger, or punishment, but because their borrowed power has been withdrawn. Their sense of control and superiority, long maintained through manipulation and emotional theft, is destabilized, and in this breaking lies a profound truth. Energy, presence, and integrity cannot be taken for granted, and boundaries once honored cannot be ignored. The empath's departure is both liberation and teaching. It frees them from cycles of depletion, manipulation, and control. It presents the narcissist with a mirror of dependency and fragility. It affirms the sacredness of energy, the necessity of boundaries, and the principle that influence is conditional upon respect. The act of walking away is a silent yet powerful demonstration that power is not found in coercion, control, or manipulation. It is found in awareness, presence, and the conscious exercise of boundaries. In the end, the empath walks away, steadily, quietly, and with inner strength. And the narcissist, deprived of what they relied upon, experiences a breaking that is inevitable, profound, and transformative. The act of withdrawal reveals truth that cannot be denied, exposes illusions that cannot endure, and restores natural balance to the flow of energy. This is the ultimate teaching. When integrity, presence, and awareness are honored, even the most fragile constructs of borrowed power cannot survive. The empath's journey is a meditation in action, a testament to clarity, discernment, and self-respect. Their walk is a statement that energy is sacred, attention is conditional, and love cannot exist where it is exploited. And the narcissist, faced with absence, encounters the inevitable breaking, a confrontation with fragility, a reflection of dependence, and a revelation that borrowed power, once withdrawn, cannot endure. In this dynamic, the empath teaches the world, restores balance, and affirms the ultimate law of energy. What is given freely and honored sustains. What is taken without consent collapses.